Welcome to this week's episode of the Business of Real Estate podcast with Lynn, Hoffmann, and Eric Johnson. Today we're joined by Peter Philip Papazach, one of our luxury residential realtors, and we are going to be talking all things luxury and how you can get into it as a specialty this week on the Business of Real Estate podcast. Welcome back. Lynn, we are in your realm as we talk luxury real estate. And we have one of your agents, Peter Philip Papazach, joining us. Peter, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'll let you start things
Okay.
off.
Well, we promised him we wouldn't ask too many tough questions. So we're gonna start this out easy on him. Peter Philip, you've been with us for over a year now, year and a half, you're in about 18 months or so, doing a tremendous job.
Thank you, Lynn.
Great branding, great looks. What would you want to share with people that want to get into this market? And you know there's a lot of our agents that would like to jump in here.
So the luxury market is, specifically luxury market?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So luxury market, I would say the most important thing is just the knowledge of the product, right? So it's what I would say differentiates luxury from everything else is the process is no different.
Right.
You're servicing the client, no different. You're putting the client first. You're serving with a servant's heart, regardless of the price point. You're servicing that client from start to end the same way. But really the difference is just the knowledge of your product being a little bit different.
Right.
So that being said, if when you want to specialize in luxury, you have to know everything about that product, and specifically that product. Who, if the house is for sale, what did it sell for before? What's the backstory to the house? What's special about it? So it's very specific about the neighborhood, the home, the street. So you have to really know your stuff. You have to specialize in the product and knowing everything about it, right? And to be a specialist, you really have to focus on a certain area, right? So you can't really be a luxury specialist all over Toronto or Mississauga, Oakville, Burlington. You guys pick a specific neighborhood and then specialize in that specific neighborhood. And if that neighborhood is a luxury neighborhood, then it's going to be a luxury price point, right?
Right.
So
Right. Good advice. So one of our previous guests on another podcast in the heavy industrial and commercial aspect of things, he basically said a very, very similar thing.
Yeah.
He said, know your product,
Yeah.
know all about your product. So for example, when people go into a house potentially to list it, should they be learning about flooring and different types of stone and different types of appliances? Should they be learning about all the finishes?
Yeah.
Or will they just figure that out as they go along, or do you think they should be looking into that and knowing that ahead of time?
Yeah, so I would say that it's actually interesting because when you have a seller, they bring you over for a listing appointment, you really want to demonstrate to the seller that you understand the value of their home, right? So when it comes to luxury properties, they will spend an extra $1 for the finishes. So you have to understand the difference between porcelain, marble, and if you don't really, that's where it really comes down to in terms of getting that top dollar, is being able to understand and present the value of that property to the buyer. Right. That's how we get top dollar. So if the seller can see that you understand the difference in the finishes that they chose and spent the premium that they spend on those finishes, if they can see that you understand that and you're able to deliver that to the buyer so the buyer understands what they're getting, that's how we get top dollar in our business. And if you're able to explain that to the seller, then the seller feels more confident in you having a listing because you're able to present the differences in the dollars that they spent. So that's really important. So when when you're showing up to these listing appointments, you really have to understand, the difference between a rift cut and a quarter cut hardwood floor, right? There's a difference.
There's a difference.
There's a difference in cost. So when it comes to these custom homes, people are spending $500-600 per square foot, or you can spend $400 per square foot. But when it comes to if the seller is spending that extra dollar, that has to translate into the listing price and the sale
Right.
price, right? So knowing your materials is really important.
Yeah.
You have to know your materials.
Yes.
That's part of it.
I think that's an excellent point that you've just made there, because I think so many times the average buyer cannot tell the difference between MDF and hardwood. I mean, they sometimes can't. They don't see the value in there, and that is really, in a luxury role, that is really your job, to know the differences and to be able to explain the differences and what that's going to mean to the buyer.
For sure.
A lot of the luxury buyers are more savvy about those things, and some of them they can spot it on their own, but there's an awful lot that don't. And they don't understand that. So that's a great point, I think, that you've given us there.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, is it a case, because you mentioned backstory of the property.
Yes.
And, I think a lot of people have watched a lot of HGTV. There's a gentleman I follow on YouTube, Enos Eelmauser.
Okay.
He does a lot of videos, and he talks about the materials and stuff a lot, but you hear these, obviously in Hollywood, there's this backstory where people go, oh, so-and-so lived there, I want to buy that house, right? And I don't think we get as much of that here. Obviously, we don't have the big stars, et cetera. So that does come into it, but I'm just curious, is there something like that, or is it more to the effect of, it's that prestige of, well, I have a house that has this type of flooring or that type, because it is a sign of status, if you will, to have a house made with this type of material or have this feature, et cetera, right?
Eric, I would say what's really important in terms of the story, and along with what you're buying as well, the actual physical home, the premium finishes, the square footage. In addition to that, to what I think you're alluding to, the story, it's more about also the neighborhood, the schooling, right? And I'll say it more this way. What I find, like, people ask me, well, Peter, what makes this area so prestigious? Like, why is it so sought after, right? A lot of it has to do with the schooling. The schooling is really good in the neighborhoods that I sell in. And so a lot of families everything is all about our kids. When it comes to families, it's all about the kids, right? So, we work hard, and we, whoever's successful, they work hard, they have this, they have the ability, they want the best for their kids, right? So if they have the ability to get their kids into the best schools, they're gonna do so. That's the number one priority for most people, right? So I find that a lot of the people I work with, they're very concerned, or they're interested in schooling and getting their kids in the best school. So these neighborhoods, the schools are really good, and the class sizes are fairly small. And more importantly, it's the parents knowing that the kids are going to school with other kids that are like-minded, right? Yeah. So it's all about that. It's about the network that their kids are creating. I went to a good school in high school in the neighborhood I sell, and a lot of my friends ended up being doctors and lawyers.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
the people that I kind of associate with. So it is, I can see that part. At the end of the day, the student's only going to be as good as they want to be, right, in the school. But it's really about the kids being exposed to other kids of like-minded, right? Yeah. So the parents are really looking after that. That's what they're looking for, right? To be in a neighborhood where it's a good neighborhood, and then on top of that, so then you also have obviously the other part of the prestige where you have, for example, we sold the house in the neighborhood that we sell to a couple of hockey players, famous ones, and so of course, when you get to, if you're hockey, if you watch hockey and you're looking for a home in my neighborhood, and I say something like, this person was, is living on the street, or they bought and sold on the street, that there's, the buyers, their ears perk up and they go, oh, really? And then you say a few other things about the neighborhood. So, there's that part to it as well. So you have the prestige of the house itself, then you have the prestige of the neighborhood, who's living in the neighborhood with you. And then obviously the most important part is that your kids are going to a good school. So I think this is the combination of things. Then there's geographical parts to it as well, where your proximity to driving to Toronto when driving was more important. Now a lot of people are working remote. So being closer to Toronto, so Mississauga, I specialize in Mississauga, South Mississauga. So, that's that first suburb stop outside of the city where you get a good backyard and a good neighborhood. So, naturally, a lot of people a lot of young professionals that, did well and then want to start a family, naturally they look for moving from Toronto condo to South Mississauga into a house with a backyard, right?
Yeah.
And a good school. So that's the migration pattern I've seen, and and being South Mississauga, close to the lake, you have some nice parks and trails, and you got the lakeshore with restaurants, and they got the GO train. So there's a convenience factor to it as well. So all of these things, as we get closer to Toronto, the property values go up, right?
Yep.
So there's all these factors that play into what makes a luxury neighborhood a luxury neighborhood. The other thing too is the lot size itself, right? Like if you're driving around a neighborhood and you see your lot sizes are consistently 100-foot wide, you're going to have a 100-foot front elevation on that home, which means it's going to have a little bit more of that curb appeal, as opposed to a street that has 25-foot frontages and 50-foot frontages. So, Mississauga compared to Toronto, or as you go deeper into the city, the lot size gets smaller, right? So these are, when you're asking about is it the finish, there's so many things. There's also the lot size that makes it a luxury neighborhood. Those wide lot frontages allow for those
Proximity
larger
to water.
Lakefront.
and that too. Yeah.
Lakefront.
Yeah.
Lakefront drives
yeah.
it up.
I think the one thing you touched on there, which I hadn't put it in that perspective, is very, very important, is in Oakville, we have Appleby College and a couple of we have quite a few private schools in Oakville. And Hamilton, Hillfield, Strathallan, to give them a shout out, is another one. And I do think that that's a very important thing. It's not just about the schooling and the education, it's about the other children that go to that schooling and education and how they stay connected for years and how they typically do quite well in their career. So they're like-minded people staying at like-minded schools,
Yes.
right? So I think that's very, very important. For you, you've built a nice team and you have a great team moving on here. How do you help build that team, and how do you get that same passion in your team members as you have for this?
So it's, I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and I was lucky. My father has been in the business for over 30 years, so I started off with a great mentor. I got a crash course at that time, I guess he was in the business for 20 years. So I got a 20 years of experience taught to me over a couple of years, in my first couple of years of real estate. So super lucky to have that. And so what that was, I'll tell you, what helped me, and I saw it because I did really well. Just my first 6 months in real estate, I did really well. I did double my income that I was getting in the corporate world. I was doing corporate before I started real estate. So I got double my income in 6 months working part-time real estate. So I was like, wow, if I can do this in 6 months part-time, double my income, what am I doing in corporate
What am I
world,
doing
right?
there? Yeah.
So a lot of it is this. Understanding sales is really important, but the psychology of it, it's like number one. Our business is about making sure that the clients are serviced, they're happy. We're there to provide solutions. We're there to advise and guide them through their journey, and we want to provide an unexpected, above and beyond experience for them. This is very important, and so it all has to start with yourself, right? And it's a mindset. You have to be inside. You got your two worlds. You got your inside world and you got your outside world. And inside, you have to have the right mindset. You can't help anyone unless you're good with yourself, right?
Yeah.
So, I grew up on Tony Robbins, right?
Yeah.
So Tony Robbins was my thing, and my father put me on it. And you got to get that energy, and you got to have that positive mindset, and it's you got to radiate with that energy, right? And so when you have that, and you're operating at that level, then you're able. And then having that energy, people can feel it and they want to
They
be
do.
around you, right?
Yeah, they
So, so that's part of the experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the other part is that people really got to know that you're doing it for them and not for yourself.
Thank you.
This is
You're hitting on some great
Yeah.
points here, Peter. You really are.
This is a really important thing because our industry, unfortunately, doesn't have the greatest reputation, and we're here. It's our responsibility to change that, and I think we are. I think we're heading. I think the newer generation. I think people are understanding this, and when you're doing it for the right reasons, this business is so much more fun and it's so much more easier, and you attract people, you attract more business, right? You attract the right clients, and that's the most important part in my mind. So, in my beginning, and I'll say it, in the beginning of my career in real estate, I was young. I was in my 20s. I was, for me, important success to me was measured in how many homes I sold. My success measure has changed over the years. My measure of success now is, how do I make people feel? Are they happy? Did I go above and beyond for them? Is there repeat and referral there? And if there is, that means I've done a great job, right? And so for me, I get my fulfillment in this business now by just seeing people, hearing them say this, Peter, you're awesome. You did a great job.
Yeah.
Peter, honestly, we trust you. You're great. You go above and beyond for us. And when I hear that, there's no money that can ever make me feel that way. And that's something that I've learned over the years of selling real estate. That once I hit those numbers in my 20s, I kind of hit a point where I said to myself, what's next? Like, how do I keep motivated when I've surpassed in my financial goals? What's next? And so for me, I do a lot of coaching with Richard Robbins, which he's awesome too. That's another thing too, is to have a good coach. How do you stay motivated? And then when it's for the right reasons, the fulfillment level of fulfillment skyrockets, right? And you feel good. So I did a lot of thinking and looking inside myself and looking at what's really important. And you come to realize that really at the end of the day, when you're doing it for someone else, it's an infinite motivation, and it keeps me passionate in the business, and it keeps me going. And when I wake up, when you're doing it for someone else, I feel like you're gonna go further than you would for yourself. So that's important. That's part of the mentality.
And that's where your referrals come from. It's evident to me that your mindset, this is one thing I talk about all the time is mindset. I just started a 5-week course, and the first day was all about mindset. And I remember one of my sales teachers talking about, it was interesting where he had us all pull out like a $20 bill. You had to rip it in half. Now, it wasn't the plastic money we have nowadays here in Canada,
easy now.
but just rip it, right? And then I had people that just wouldn't rip it. They're just no, you can just tape it back together and use it, right? But it was this mindset of money, and where when you think that for some people, it's who's gonna, why would anybody pay $10 million, $5 million for a home? You can get a nice home for $1 million or less than, right?
That's the same job.
And it's that mindset of you don't see the value in it. So we were talking about the finishes. And so, I would say if you're somebody looking to get into luxury and you're attracted by the price point and saying, man, I can make a lot more money, but you got to have the right mindset. As you said, is that understand that there is a value there, and some people see the value and other people don't. And I think that's, to me, that's one of the keys, is that right mindset.
The very first courses that I wrote for luxury with this brokerage were all revolved around mindset. Because the one thing I found at the beginning was that people thought of themselves as a fraud because they didn't feel comfortable. Imposter syndrome, And that was very interesting for me. I never realized that would be the issue. I thought it was, the tools and the marketing and the this and the that. But the one thing that you said it, the first word you used was service. it's a serving position. You're there to serve people. You're there, they're number one, you're not number one. That is a thing that it's very difficult to get people to buy into and understand sometimes. And when you do go above and beyond, as I teach all the time as well, it comes back to you. It does, in the way of referrals, in the way of great comments about you out there in the industry and everything else. So that is the part, I think, that becomes fun and more. And Peter does the most amazing open events for people. I mean, above and beyond, it's crazy what he does. But I know that everybody there, the homeowner and all the people, they do really enjoy that and appreciate it.
Yes.
Because you do pour, no holes barred, just like absolutely everything he does is top drawer. And I think that's
it's almost
what.
like you said, you're talking about the over and above. It's kind of like when we look at hotels, like we had the Ritz-Carlton
Yes.
come and speak.
Yes.
And you look at, the Sheraton
Yes.
versus a Super 8 versus a Ritz-Carlton, it's still a place to stay in.
Yes.
There's a room, there's a bed, but it's the level of service, right? And would
Yeah.
you say that when it comes to doing in luxury is that, obviously you have the mindset, but it is that they are expecting a little bit more than what the average agent is going to provide?
I'm going to say it this way. I think everyone should provide the same level of service, and that's the best service you can
That's why
possibly
teaching
provide.
it too.
Right?
I do too. I agree with you.
So I really will say it this way. Like, okay, so the type of, the personality, I would say maybe, okay, so there may be some people that may expect more because they're in a luxury home, potentially, but there may be some, but I think overall everyone expects the same, that the best that you can possibly do for them.
Yep.
But I honestly think that majority of the people I work with are so down to earth. They're so kind. They understand the value of the time, the value of time.
That's a big
The value
thing.
of time.
Yes.
So that's a big one. And so I'm lucky that that pretty much everyone I've worked with is always been kind and considerate. But I've never felt that way where, if someone feels like, just because they're in a luxury that they deserve more or they expect more. I've never looked at it that way. To me, I've never looked at price point.
No.
I only look at relationship.
And relationship.
I only look at, so for me, it's not I'm not transactional,
Yeah.
I'm relationship based.
Yeah.
So it just so happens my relationships end up being luxury relationships. Why? Because I chose a couple of neighborhoods. I drive 5 minutes at most, 10 minutes at most to my appointments. And that just so happens to be in a luxury neighborhood.
You also like to do cold calling too.
So I do door knocking.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, door
Sorry.
knocking. I do a lot of door knocking.
Yeah.
I do a lot of door knocking.
Yes, I know.
Once or twice a week. And I do a lot of open houses. 80% of my business when I started was through open houses and door knocking. Now a lot of it's most of it's repeat referral now.
Yeah.
But I still door knock and I still do open houses. Why? Because it's good to keep your skills sharpened, and I'm always looking to grow. I'm always growing. Yeah.
Another thing that Peter just alluded to there was people that have a high net worth. They tend to understand the value of knowledge and time more than some people do.
Yep.
They really do. They have a better understanding of that. They appreciate that more, and that's typically because they come from an industry themselves where their knowledge is valuable. A few minutes of wisdom for them is worth a lot of money, so they do tend to understand that more. But one thing I totally agree with Peter on is I believe everybody should have a similar level of service. I don't think there should be a different way that you treat your clients just because they're selling an $800,000 house as opposed to an $8 million. There may be other things that you do, other steps you take, but the way you treat them, the way that you do the work for them, the way that you market it is.
The dollar investment is going to be your difference, really, at the end of the day. But whether I have a $400,000, let's just say $600,000 condo, there's not too many 400,000
No,
anymore,
not
but
left.
it's a $600,000 or a $6 million listing.
Yeah.
My process is exactly
Same.
the same.
Yeah.
We do everything the same in terms of our systems.
Yeah.
What does happen though with the higher price point listings, there is a bigger budget that we can spend on
Right.
our social media, on our print marketing, on our online advertising, on our events,
Right.
So there is a bigger budget. We do have to cast a bigger net for the higher price point listings because there's less buyers that are actively looking in that price point than there are in lower price points. It's a pricing pyramid. So there is more time spent looking for a buyer as well. 60% of my listings are double-ended, right? So the average agent will probably, in my neighborhood, will probably do it 15% of the time. So we're 4 times more likely to bring a buyer. Why? Because I don't only spend time on looking for listings, I also am working with buyers, right? And I found that out early in my career that how I got ahead. I was young, I started in my 20s. I was competing with some legacy families, and I found my way ahead of to get ahead was that it's easy to list, but it's not as hard. It's a lot harder to work with buyers, right? Because you're spending a lot more time, 4 times more time with a buyer than you would with a listing. So I found out that if I put the work into working with buyers, that's what brought that's what makes the sale happen. Is if you have the buyer, you're selling the house. And I realized that the sellers, that's what they want. The sellers want the buyer. They don't want so much the agent. They want the buyer. Whoever brings the buyer, that's who they're listing with, and that's who they're going to work with. Every seller's answer, bring me a buyer. And so I was doing lots of open houses. I was doing a lot of open house every weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So I would get a listing, and I would open house the crap out of it, and buyers would come in, and I would, obviously the first priority is to sell the house, but if they weren't interested in that house, I would find out what that house was missing, figure out the criteria that they're looking for, and I'd ask them very simply, if I came across a home that had the criteria that you're looking for, would you like me to let you know about it? And every buyer would say, yes. Okay, great. What's your name and what's your number? Bang, contact.
That's the secret.
Going into the database, and then when I went and door knocked a seller, would you consider selling? Yes, we would. Do you have a buyer? You know what? I might. So I go into my database, I look, and guess what? The buyer that came through that open house, now they're getting a house that's not listed on MLS. Right. Through my door knocking. The seller is now seeing the value of me not just listing a house like everyone else, but actually bringing the buyer. Wow, Peter, how did you do that? Well, it's hard work, but it's working both sides. It's not just working both sides.
It's working both sides, and I've been trying to teach this a lot in my courses and classes. It's having a database of buyers and what the buyers want. So when you finally come across the unicorn they're looking for, you got it, you know where it is, and how you get that is hard work and, door knocking, cold calling, and things like that.
So in luxury space, there's less transactions. I'll do like 40, 50 transactions a year, but my average price point is about $3.5 million.
Yeah.
So this way of working works well in this space because you're not dealing with hundreds of houses. Right now there's over 5 million. There's 25 houses for sale in Mississauga, and the months of inventory are terrible. It's one house is sold in the last month, so we've got 25 months of inventory. Wow. So it's tough. It's a tough market, right? So you got to know everything about those 25 houses because you have a very limited supply. So the buyer, your value is only as good as you knowing more than the buyer, right? So
and they had the ability to look up a lot of stuff.
So this is where the backstory comes, right? This is where the backstory comes because they have the price history of the house. They have the time, they have all the history.
The technical information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they don't have this backstory. And this is where we're talking about being an expert in your neighborhood, being an expert. Right. And what differentiates a luxury agent from everyone? It's not that I do anything different. Not the service. It's not anyone can put a suit on and drive a nice car. But it's about knowing the backstory, the additional information that you can't find on the internet. And so that's where the value comes in to the buyer. And the seller, we talked about it, is knowing your inventory, knowing your product. The buyer needs to hear stuff like, why is this a good? What's good about this house, or
Yeah.
is it priced high, is it priced low, and why? So
Right.
okay, well, if you'll have a house that well, there's a house for sale, and the buyer's asking questions. Why is this house priced so high, and why did the comparable sell? This other house sold for so
Exactly.
low.
Yeah.
And they go,
You need to know.
Peter, I don't
Why?
understand. I go, well, hold on, which house you're talking about that sold for such a low price?
Yeah.
For such a good price. They'll say
Yes.
good price. And they'll say, that house, XYZ. I said, oh, I know. Well, you know what? Did you know that XYZ house that sold for such a good price, their basement flooded while they were for sale? They took it off. Did you see it came off the market? And it came off, well, their basement flooded. There was $200,000-$300,000 in damages there. And then that's why it came off the market, and it came back on the market, and then it sold for that price is because for whatever reasons.
Yep.
People won't know that. I'll know that because I showed the house or I sold it myself, right? So
Know the
I'll
history
know,
of the house.
I'll be able to talk to the comparables where the buyer hasn't walked through any of the comparables, or maybe some of them, but not most of them,
Not most
or
of them.
over the years.
Yeah.
And they so they haven't had that firsthand experience, and I have. So I give them that information where they wouldn't be able to find anywhere else, and that's where you start to really present value to the buyer and differentiate yourself. And for you as an agent to get into that market, you have to know those stories. You have to be able to go see those homes. You have to preview those homes.
Yeah.
You got to walk through them.
Yeah.
If you don't have a buyer, you're not able to show. You got to get through the agent open houses. You got to get through the previews. You got to go to the open houses. You got to see those homes. You got to walk them, and then you got to try and understand,
What the difference?
what's special about the neighborhood and the house and so forth. Once you start talking like this to a buyer, that's when you become a luxury agent.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, and again, all about knowledge.
Yeah.
And knowing your market, knowing your inventory, knowing your people.
Yeah.
There's some valuable tips there.
And I think that's one thing I try and teach to even those not doing luxury is that ability. I've talked to people looking at do teams, talk about the specialists, right? The buyer specialist, and going, they should be going out and looking at all the homes for sale.
Yeah.
I think that's the one thing a lot of agents don't do is, as you said, look at the neighborhood. Have you been in the houses? If
Around your
I'm
inventory.
doing an open house and I know what's my competition, and what are people going? Have I been in those homes? Do I know? Because that just shows that knowledge and how far you're willing to go, right? And people, as you said, people are willing to pay for the knowledge and the time. You put the time in, you will get that back.
Yeah.
Can you imagine negotiating at a table for $5? It doesn't really matter the price point, but imagine negotiating at a table and talking about comparables that you haven't seen yourself.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
Kind of hard.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And then the
But a lot of people do it.
and then the buyer says, "Well, the buyer says I've been through those homes,
Yeah.
and did you know that this was?" And then or
Did
the
you
seller,
see the joints?
or
Did you see the carpentry? Did you see the materials?
Yeah. Or you hear
Are you
this-
kidding me?
Or you hear the seller say, and there's been times there's no basement in that house, and then you're like,
Oh,
well, what? Right? So that's never. I mean, that maybe in my early days that happened, but.
No, you got to know. You
gotta
got to
know-
know your inventory. You got to know what's out there and what's been and what's come and what's gone. You need to know. Get in the other houses as well.
You got to know
You got to know your neighborhoods.
You got to
where
know
you're
your
selling.
inventory. You got to know your
Yeah.
product.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in let's talk a little bit more about marketing aspect, because you mentioned about casting a wider net because there is a smaller pool of people comparatively to regular residential. How far do you go? Like, what are some of the things you do? Because I mean, I've seen magazines, Rob reports and things like that, where you go, man, they have some real estate listed in there. Like some people are going like searching worldwide. What do you do in terms of to cast a wider net?
Okay.
What are some of the things?
So this is really specific to your market. The way you market is specific to your market, and I'll give you an example. I've only done, my father in 30 plus years has done 0 non-resident sales. I've done 1 in 15 years. So the whole non-resident advertising to the international community to sell to a non-resident I've only done one.
It's a listing tool. It's just a
So I'm just gonna
difficult.
I'll touch on certain things that
Yeah.
you'll hear. You advertise internationally for the non. When's the last time a non-resident purchase happened in Mississauga? Now we're talking Mississauga. I've done one in 15 years. It doesn't really happen. It's not. This is not a market that a non-resident is looking to purchase in. It's not Dubai, right? Mississauga is not Dubai. Now that might happen a little bit more in Toronto. So if I was focusing in the Toronto luxury space, this would be a marketing tool that I'd be interested in pursuing.
We had one in our brokerage. We had one $10 million island that sold.
Yeah.
And he was a guy from Texas, and he purchased it about 4 or 5 weeks before this ban came into effect.
Yeah.
And that's been it. And then the rest of it's dried right up. Very unusual property.
So what you have to do is you have to understand who your buyer is, where they're coming from. Understand your target market. And then you market to your target market, right? So I know my migration patterns. So I know my migration pattern is from Toronto to and west, from Toronto to Mississauga, Oakville. And then you have Mississauga, Oakville to Burlington. So you have an east to west migration pattern. And then you have a north to south migration pattern. So you have people, and this is going to be immigrants that came to Canada, did really well, set up their own businesses, became professionals, and then 10, 15 years in Canada, have done well, have worked hard, and done well, live in North Mississauga, live in Brampton or North Mississauga, and now want a better lifestyle because they've worked their butts off, and they now want that lifestyle, that nicer home. And so they're moving from north to south. Better schools, exactly. So you have a north to south migration pattern, east to west. So now we understand those migration patterns, we're going to market to those communities, right? So you have that so instead of, a lot of people, do you market to the interact? Well, I actually noticed that most of my purchasers, and if you look at our competitions listings in their sales, the buyers are coming from these areas. So this is where we want to focus, right? And you look at Oakville, most of the purchases, I would say over 80% of the purchases for 2024, over 5 million, came from Markham, came from Richmond Hill, came from Markham, from these areas. Chinese, there's a lot of Chinese. There's a Chinese migration into Oakville. So again, if you recognize these migration patterns, then you start marketing towards them. So that's the marketing strategy, right? So that's your marketing strategy. And if you just if I showed up to a seller in South Mississauga and said, look, my international campaign is so great. Look at how much money I'm spending on it. Really, what's the real question is how many in the last 5 or 10 houses that sold over 5 million, how many of those were international buyers? Zero. So then what are we focusing on here?
Yep.
So that is, and I noticed that most of the sales over 5 million are done by a local agent, local agent from Mississauga that's an expert in the area, right? And that's the buyer side of it. The listing side, some sellers may think that listing with a Toronto agent is superior than listing with a Mississauga agent, and I've gone through that data with the seller, and I show them, look, at the end of the day, the majority of the sales that happened over 5 million were the buyers were brought by local agents, right? Because the buyers recognize that they want to work with a local expert. I could not represent a buyer in the Toronto luxury space as well as I could in the Mississauga space, of course. And vice versa. A Toronto agent would never be able to tell the story I'm talking about in Mississauga, in my neighborhood, knowing the homes, knowing the product, knowing the inventory as well as that. There's no chance a Toronto agent will come into my neighborhood that I live in also and grew up in and sell in, be able to tell me more than and vice versa. So I would never be able to do that in a Toronto neighborhood. So the buyers recognize that. So when I'm standing in front of the buyer and I'll say to them, look, I live here, I grew up here, I know the area like the back of my hand, I went to school here, I've bought and sold many homes in the area, I know the neighbors, I know everything that's great, like the restaurants, everything about it. The buyer really appreciates that, and I couldn't do that in Hamilton. I couldn't do it in Toronto. I don't have that specialty, right? So of knowledge. And so the buyer really recognizes that, I think. They value that.
That's good.
How much do you feel that branding, what kind of value is there in that branding? Is it worth as much as as some people think? Because is it just the knowledge, or do you put a lot into your branding? Because I've seen it, you see some of the luxury, like they'll go over the top and, with their branding. I'm just curious your take on it.
There's two sides to this business, it's you have to know your stuff, and then you gotta look the part too.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that. Look, everyone judges a book by its cover. It's just natural.
Yeah.
You have to look the part, so that means you have to have the right brochure material. Like you have to have the high quality stock, the feel. You got to look the luxury, like the luxury agent. So the branding is important. It is, and why it's important is because if you're not marketing yourself differently in a luxury way, then how is the seller? The seller is looking at how you market yourself, because they're going to look at how you're going to market them.
Yeah.
So if you're
It is a
able to
reflection,
present yourself in that elevated space, then they're going to say, well, if he's capable of doing that for himself, he's going to obviously do that for my house in that same level.
Right.
So you have to
And
have it
certain
elevated.
brands are always associated with luxury, like Ritz-Carlton,
Yes.
Rolex.
Yeah.
There's many of them. And so what you've done with your branding is also differentiate yourself with your team name and your look. When you see it, you know who it is, right? And it's a branding that you've chosen to show the elevation of your company and your service. And people see that just in the pictures. There doesn't have to be a ton of words. It's just you visually see it and you associate that with
Your color-
that level of service.
Color choices, font choices.
Everything to the details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, which is, because this is what we talk about. I mean, it's always nice when we can ask a question and somebody backs up what we've already talked about in other episodes, which is nice. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you certainly have. But Peter's brand does live that luxury look, and when you look at it, you certainly know what space that you live in, and you're comfortable in that space, and there is always those associations. I've used the analogy a lot of times. A Rolls Royce and a BMW both get you the same place, but which one is even more luxurious than the other one, right? So it's all how it looks.
I'll say one more thing. It was how do you choose? Like I find that some people think luxury, there's something special about it, like that you have to be special. It's not. It's the door, for example, for me, when I door knock, it's the door I choose to knock on.
Yeah.
And really, if you have the knowledge creates the confidence.
You just said the confidence.
Yeah.
Yep.
You have tons of confidence, and you present yourself well, and you're not afraid to have a conversation with anybody at any level, whether it be up or down level.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're very confident.
Appreciate that.
But that's what
Thank you.
people. I've been trying to say this to agents for so long. It's about mindset, and you're right. The smarter you are, the more competent you feel, the more confident you feel when you get there. So
The knowledge breeds the confidence.
Yes.
The confidence breeds the business, right?
Yes.
The success of your business. And so you really, I'm no different from any other agent. I just choose to knock on a door that's maybe 2 or 3 times more expensive than the average door,
Right.
which then also generates 2 or 3 times more income
That's
for
right.
the same amount of effort, right? So this is something I heard, like Invidiata is, he's a luxury agent. He's, one of the originals
he's
of luxury.
He's an icon from Oakville.
Right? And so my father, of course, as I'm growing up in the household of real estate, I'm hearing these family names, and of course, Invidiata is one of those ones you hear. And I've watched Invidiata speak, in the past. And one of the key things that really stood out to me was, and I always thought this to myself. I always wondered the same question: how does someone become such a luxury icon? How did this start? Like, there must have been a beginning. What was it? Like, what was the catalyst? What's the root of it? Same kind of questions you're asking me right now. Like, how does what's luxury? So I was always curious about it, and it was for him is that I believe, maybe I don't have this 100% right, but I think it's pretty much right. Was that he specialized he was in the luxury clothing business, I think, from what I remember. So he was comfortable speaking with people at that level.
Yeah.
So it was just comfort of being able to speak at that level. So when he decided to get into real estate in the beginning, I believe, because he was comfortable working with those people, he said, well, you know what, I'm gonna go, from his beginning of his door knocks, I think his first time he went door knocking, he went and door knocked waterfront property. And he said to himself, like, if I'm gonna go knock on a door, I'm gonna knock on the best ones, or the most expensive ones.
Yep.
And bang, so he started knocking on waterfront doors, waterfront property doors, and bang, he becomes a waterfront specialist, right? And then catapults him into the luxury space. Similar thing with me. How I looked at it was, I was in my 20s. Who's going to want to list with a 20-year, mid 20s, when you have legacy families doing luxury? So, how am I going to get into that space? And how I did it was, I knew that at that time we were in the beginning, the boom in Mississauga of custom home building. So I found a niche, and my niche was, I knew there's a bunch of spec building. There was money in spec building at that time. And so I realized that builders were looking for land because builders were making money. So if I was able to find land that wasn't listed on MLS, so I went and door knocked the land, found it, I would have my list of builders, and I would say to the builder, I say, listen, if I find a lot for you, will you buy it with me if I show it to you? And then when you buy the lot, would you use me to list?
Yeah.
And the builder would say, yes, you find me a good lot, give me a good price, I will list with you. And then guess what that 100 by 200 foot lot was, that ended up being a 5,500, 6,000 square foot home, custom built, brand new, luxury custom built home. So then here I am selling to a builder that they don't really care about, they're a little bit more rugged around the edges. They don't care about the whole legacy family, everything has to be perfect. No, they just wanted the land because they were looking at the dollar signs. Yeah. And then on the other side, if my effort, my eagerness, my commitment to working hard, they saw that. So I followed through with my commitment to providing, the results. So then they said, well, Peter, we see how hard you work. Here's the listing that we promised you. Now at that time it was $2-3 million. It would be a $2-3 million custom. This is 10 years ago. $2-3 million custom home at the age of 25, 27 years old, representing it. Now I'm doing open houses on it. Now I'm getting buyers come and you see the spin-off.
Yeah. Oh,
and
100%.
that was my niche. That's how I got it. So if you can find a niche, it's not easy to go heads up with a legacy family or someone that's been in the real estate business for that long in the luxury space to try and get market share.
Yep.
So if you find a niche, that's, if you can find a niche, that's kind of, an easier way of getting in.
Absolutely.
Well,
Great
thank you
points.
very much for joining us here today.
Great points.
As you guys, hopefully you've picked up, we've used the word a lot of times here as mindset. It truly is a mindset. And whether you're doing luxury or non-luxury residential, it is still all about mindset and believing and having the confidence in yourself. And what I picked up was that you did a lot of the things to give you that confidence to go and visit the houses, know the stories, know all that information. And that's really what it builds up to. So can you get into luxury? Of course you can. Have the right mindset, build a good brand, is what we heard here today. And you can be successful within the luxury market. So thank you for joining us this week. We really appreciate it. As usual, please subscribe, like, and follow us on all our channels. We want to thank Peter so much for joining us today. Thank you, guys. We will see you next week on the Business of Real Estate podcast with Lynn Hoffmann and Eric Johnson.
Thank you.